Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FreshBooks. Go to freshbooks.com/Arel. In the How Did You Hear About Us section, put The Art of Likeability. You'll get 30 free days of their awesome invoicing, expense tracking, and get paid faster software.
Welcome to The Art of Likeability, ranked one of the top podcasts in the world. In this podcast, you'll discover how to leverage likability to build stronger relationships, lead more efficiently, close more sales, and keep customers happy while increasing success in your professional and personal life. Let's jump in with your host, Arel Moody.
What's going on, Art of Likeability family? Arel Moody here, your host of the Art of Likeability podcast, where we teach you super amazing strategies that can give you the skills to levitate as high as buildings and go through the atmosphere and breathe in space. Okay, you can't do any of those things. None of those things are true. You can't levitate and you definitely can't breathe in space. That would absolutely kill you. But what you can do is learn amazing strategies and skills on how to build deeper, meaningful connections and relationships with people. And today, you are in for a treat. You're in for a treat that tastes better than whatever is the greatest treat you just had during the holidays. It's going to be 15 times better than that, because with us today on this amazing interview, we got Dr. Ahmad Rahim. He's an award-winning author, educator, and entrepreneur and Fulbright scholar, as well as a TEDx speaker. His story was turned into a short documentary called Against All Odds and is an international award-winning film. This is really, really cool stuff. I've seen it. It's extremely powerful. He's been featured in Huffington Post, Forbes magazine, CEO magazine, and right now he is author of the new book, Resilience, From the Killing Fields to the Boardroom, The S.A.L.T Effect, S.A.L.T. And we're going to talk more about that, what that is, and how you can use that to overcome your struggles, to persevere and make more success happen in your personal and professional life. This is going to be killer. So with that said, welcome, Mr. Dr. Ahmad Rahim.
Thank you for having me. 15%, man. I thought I was better tasting than that.
No, 15 times.
Oh, 15 times.
We did 15 times. We didn't do 15%.
Okay, I'm hearing it wrong.
So you know how there's the 10X?
Yeah.
We went 15X.
Oh, okay.
So
I appreciate that.
You're welcome. So, I'm lucky enough to be able to call you a friend. I've known you for a lot of years now, and I've seen firsthand all the great work that you're doing. Tell people a little bit of the backstory. Now, you're overcoming struggle. Like, a lot of people talk about struggle. Like, I talk about, I grew up in the projects. I came over with things. But when I heard your story, I was like, and it was really great to hear your story, because whatever we think adversity is, when we actually get a sense of what other people's adversities are, we actually get to see how much of a blessing our life is if we look at it that way. And when I heard your story, it was very powerful for me, because where you came from and what you had to overcome at a very young age are things that most people, I don't even think they can really conceptually fathom. So obviously, it's hard to truncate what a whole movie was made off of. But tell us a little bit about your background story, where you came from.
All right. So I was born in a concentration camp in the killing fields of Cambodia. So people that may not know of the history, in the 70s, Cambodia went through a civil war. The Communist Party, which is known as the Khmer Rouge, took over Cambodia and massacred over 3 million people. My family was caught in that war. We were captured and we were placed in a concentration camp. Now, in that concentration camp, I was born, and it's the same camp that my father was executed. My older brother died of starvation, and eventually we were able to escape the concentration camp and made our way to the refugee camp in Thailand. And like many refugees that were lucky enough to get sponsored, we came to America. But like a lot of refugee stories, it didn't end happily when you land in America, right? So they didn't put you in Beverly Hills, right? They didn't put you in the suburbs. They often put you in some of the worst neighborhoods. So I was raised in Brooklyn, New York, like yourself, right? And I was raised in Sunset Park on 61st Street. And 61st Street and Sunset Park was a very rough neighborhood. This was in the early 80s, so we're not talking about, Beyonce and Jay-Z, Brooklyn, right? We're talking about New Jack City, Wesley Snipes, type of images. This is the height of the crack epidemic. This is the height of gang war territory, and my neighborhood was filled with that. Um, Now, I could talk a lot of those negative images, but one of the positive things about my neighborhood was block parties, right? And that's when the community came together. It's like a Spike Lee movie. We used to shut down 61st Street. The YMCA used to come up, and they would turn on the fire hydrants. People, just playing hopscotch, basketball. Puerto Ricans and Dominicans came out to barbecue, and merengue was blasting. And I just remember this melting pot. Um, but as a kid, uh, during these block parties, sometimes scuffles do happen when you have different type of neighborhoods coming together to party. And when I was a kid, a fight broke out, and I walked into the crossfire of a gunshot, um, and was shot in the leg. And because of that situation, because of that incident, my mom moved us to Syracuse, New York, and that's where we've been ever since, right? So that's kind of like my backstory as a kid.
So now, when I started reading your book, one of the things that I thought was interesting is talking about your childhood, that you didn't, your actual biological father passed, and you kind of had different people who were quote unquote father figures for you. There's a part in your book where you talk about you kind of had this like snapping point with someone who wasn't the greatest guy in your family, who you kind of had to almost escape from. So you go through all of these things when you're younger. Tell us a little bit about what that was, because I think it plays a pivotal role in a lot of that you're doing now.
Yeah, yeah. So going back to my story, for many years I did not know that story.
Mm,
So we're talking about until I was 14,
mm,
right? So up to that point, I thought my stepfather was my biological father. I mean, this person had been in our life for many, many years. So up to any type of memory I had included him. So I never questioned, his status as being a father, right? Being my biological father. But he was a very abusive man, extremely abusive. And when I was 14, we got into a fight, and I was abused pretty badly. I ran away and was homeless for 2 weeks. When I eventually came back, I found out that he was not my father. I found out the true story behind what happened to my father, and we got into a fight. And this time, I didn't treat him like a father. So in that fight, I hurt him pretty badly, and that kind of changed everything in regards to my work with abuse, my work with at-risk families, my work with inner city programs. So I do a lot of mentorship, uh, storytelling, um, motivational keynotes, and things like that. So that came out. I mean, part of the SALT was 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 a memoir, right? So piece of it is a memoir, it's storytelling, but it's using those survival techniques that I went through that I think is pretty general. I think a lot of us, it's built in us, but we often don't get a chance to reflect on them,
right.
right?
And that's the thing that I find over and over and over, that, for you listening right now, you may not know what it's like to grow up in a concentration camp, or to have been shot, or to have an abusive stepfather who you find out is not your father and who's hurting your family, and you get the strength to leave that situation. You may not have those specific things, but the human experience is universal. We all know what it's like to maybe feel oppressed in some shape, form, or fashion. We all know what it feels like to want a better situation for ourselves, but feel like we're stuck due to our circumstances in our current situation. And we all know what it feels like to have that desire to fight against this oppression. Now, some of us never actually take the fight, but we know what that feeling is, and some of us do. And that fight can come in various different forms. So the human experience of it is the same. Now, what I'm curious to know about you is how you make this decision to go. I mean, because it's socially acceptable. You're from the killing fields. You lost your biological father. You've been shot. You had an abusive father. You had to actually physically fight your abusive father to kind of emancipate yourself and your family from them. Anyone could say, listen, totally acceptable for you to become, just a unproductive member of society. Like, look at all this stuff. But you decided to take an extremely different turn. You're now a doctor. You are a training and consultant at Cornell University, professor at Bellevue University, co-authored books. I mean, you've made a distinct pivot. Can you get to that point where you decided your life is not going to be this unproductive member, but your life is going to be greater? What was that pivot moment?
So we call that the turning point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So my turning point was love, right? Someone showed me love, and it was a man by the name of Willie Dardell who saw something inside of me that I didn't know existed. So in high school I was a mess. Fights, struggling in my academics, failing. I was placed in special education. I was one of those kids in that resource room and Lean On Me, the movie, right? So I had all these issues going on. And I had a conversation with my student advisor, and we're talking about 10th grade. And I had gotten to a lot of problems. And she pretty much told me there's no way I'm graduating. I mean, I had 2 years left. And here's my student advisor who's supposed to support me, who's supposed to motivate me to continue my education and complete school. And she's telling me there's no way I'm going to graduate high school. And I'm better off pursuing my GED. Like, drop out of high school, leave high school, and do your GED at home. So we don't have to deal with you. That's basically what she was saying. And regardless of my past mistakes, regardless of my situation, I always thought high school was still obtainable. I thought my diploma was still obtainable. That was something I wanted to give to my mother. And here's a lady saying, you can't have that. I'm going to take that away from you, right? You still have 2 years, but there's no way you can that you can complete this successfully. And I was in the hallway after that conversation looking for a fight. Just pissed at the world, just waiting for someone to snap at me, someone to look at me the wrong way. And Willie Dardell, Mr. Dardell, saw that, right? He saw this pissed, angry kid in the hallway ready for a fight, and he pulled me aside, and he had a very long conversation with me, almost like a man-to-man conversation that you don't have with administrators, right? And after that conversation, he asked me a very simple question. Do you want to succeed? And I said, yeah. He said, no, do you want to succeed? I said, of course I want to succeed. And he goes, well, what's your plan? I said, I don't have any, right? And he goes, well, let's talk about the first step. What do you want? And I said, I want to graduate. And he goes, if you want to graduate, I can help you, but you need to meet me halfway. And this is how you meet me halfway, right? So here was a man that did not know me, but gave me that respect, gave me that opportunity, right? And that's all I needed, right? And after that conversation, he got me into a program called OLC. It stood for Occupational Learning Center. We call it One Last Chance, right? And it was a program I didn't know existed, but basically you spend half the day learning a trade, and you spend the other half of the day learning the basics, talking about English, science, math, and things like that. And I graduated in 2 years. I stayed out of trouble. Every time I was upset, angry, I knocked on Mr. Dardell's door, and he opened it, right? He spent the weekends with me, trained in boxing, kind of like kept me out of the streets. If I didn't show up in class, he would show up at my house. I mean, this is that type of guy. I mean, he was my Morgan Freeman, right? And when I graduated high school, I was happy, technically. I was satisfied, like, it's done. And he was happy to see me graduate. But as soon as I walked the stage, he pulled me aside and he said, what's next, right? He said, what's next? And I said, I don't know what's next. I'm just happy, with the current situation, right? Well, I'm living in the moment. And he's like, no, he's like, you can't go back to that life. You can't go back to those streets. It needs to start from somewhere, and we're going to start from right here. And within that week, he took me up to OCC. I mean, here's a kid that barely graduated high school.
And tell people what OCC is.
Oh, OCC is Onondaga Community College. So he took me to the local community college. And because my mother didn't speak English well, he basically completed all of my application for me, right? He helped me with the FAFSA, right, with the financial aid, introduced me to professors, got me in the EOP program, helped me write my essay. I couldn't afford, take an SAT, which was a few $100s back then. Couldn't afford to take any of those SAT preps and things like that. But I mean, to be honest, I didn't know what a SAT was to begin with, right? So there was no way I could leave for college, right? The idea of leaving for college was not, in my mind, right? I had to take care of my mother. I had to take care of my siblings. And this man was giving me a way out. He was giving me another opportunity. And he was not just giving it to me. He was pushing me, right? He was giving me that love and respect that I lacked.
Right. So, there's a phrase I heard that has always stuck out to me, and I think your story also kind of exemplifies this, that hurt people hurt people, right? So when we see people who are mean for no reason, or we see people like if you're working with coworkers and they seem always angry, and you're like, man, those people are always hurting people, like whether it's physically or emotionally, the odds are very, very high that they're hurt. Like they may not admit it, but it's a really great strategy to realize, and I think that's what your mentor is able to see in you, that you didn't want to hurt people, but you really were a hurt person.
Yes, yes.
And it's important that as leaders, as people who are either managers or heads of our family, that when people are acting out, a lot of the times it's not they just want to be a horrible person. It's because something's hurting them and they need support. And that's what you got. You got that support that you needed, because if anyone else would have been like, he's just a jerk, or Ahmad's he's just a bad apple, then you would have just continued down that path. But someone saw in you, and I think that is what the power of a mentor does. A mentor sees in you what you can't see in yourself until you can see it in yourself. So, you start through your life, and at the time, you didn't know it was called the S.A.L.T effect, right?
Yeah.
You were just kind of living life. But now when you look back and you look at this kind of pivot point that sends you on this trajectory to become a doctor, to become an entrepreneur, to become a very, very in-demand keynote speaker. He travels and trains large corporations and also speaks at colleges and schools as well. So that was that pivot point, and you developed what you call your S.A.L.T, or the S.A.L.T effect.
Yeah.
So tell me about, one, when you realized this is what you did, like, because you weren't sitting around like when you were 18, like, all right, I'm going to be doing S right now. Right? I'm going to be doing A right now. Like, you look back and you saw it. So what was it that made you realize that the S.A.L.T effect was what impacted you, and also share with us what it stands for?
Okay. So the S.A.L.T effect stands for survival, adapting, love, and transformation, right? So very simple acronyms. But reflecting back, I realized, with the help of a colleague, that S.A.L.T was something that was very general, right? I mean, it's a common theme in our lives, right? At the same time, S.A.L.T is a very powerful ingredient. We often don't think we think of S.A.L.T as just as something used as, to taste, right? But it's also a preservative. It saved lives, right? Before we had refrigerators, S.A.L.T was the thing that preserved our food.
Right, like people don't realize refrigeration is just like 100 years old.
Exactly,
right? Like,
exactly.
We lived for a long time before it, right?
Yeah, and through the trade of salt and silk, we talk about the African trade route, right? S.A.L.T was worth its weight in gold at one point, so that's how powerful it is. So we came up with the acronym because we thought about S.A.L.T. But also, I grew up in Syracuse, which is considered the Salt City, right? So kind of all that stuff tied together. But when you look at the acronyms itself, when I reflected back on my life, I realized it was a survival story, right? I was on survival mode, constant, right? Looking for ways to get out of that situation, or looking for ways to survive that situation. So survival was always there, right? I survived the killing fields. I survived Brooklyn. I survived the streets of Syracuse, poverty, abuse, and things like that. So survival was always in me. But the ability to adapt in that situation was something I had to reflect on and figure out, how do I how do I build off of that? How do I improve my situation and adapt better in my situation as I continue on in my life?
So you're seeing survival is what allows you to get to the adapt phase. Is
Yes.
that what I'm hearing,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Because a lot of times, I mean, people can survive being in a really crappy romantic relationship. Like they can like be in it their whole life and then die, right? So
Yep,
you
yep.
can survive it, but that's not really what is the goal, right?
Exactly,
Like
exactly.
you can survive living in a concentration camp, but the goal is to adapt so that you can improve upon it.
Exactly, exactly.
So let's step back now. Let's talk to the folks who are currently in survival mode right now, because some people, and this could be you listening. I want you to. We're all in some place in our life, by the way, in some form of survival mode. It might be, I'm just surviving my job. I get from Monday. I just got to get. If I can just survive till Friday, at least I have the weekend. Or maybe some of us are in a romantic relationship that we're like metaphorically, and some of us just frankly physically surviving, right?
Mm.
What is it that you would recommend to someone to actually kind of create that spark to move from survival to adaptation? Because we can, I mean, left to some of our own devices, we can stay in a bad situation for a very, very, very long time. What is it that you see is that spark that's necessary to get out of that first phase to move into what is like that turning point phase, the
Yeah.
adaptation?
No, that's a great question. I think first we have to reflect on our situation. We have to recognize that we are in survival mode. I think a lot of people don't realize they're in survival mode,
Right.
right? So once you recognize, you are no longer in denial, right? You're saying, listen, I don't want to be, because no one wants to be in survival mode, right? You don't want to be, like the show Survivor. You don't want to be stuck on an island and not win, right?
Right.
So you want to win, right? So you have to say, I survived, but I need to improve my situation now, right? So whatever skill you had to survive, you need to advance on that, right? Whatever coping mechanism you have in place to survive, you need to advance on that. And it requires you to, one, acknowledge that you're in survival mode, but then reflect on your surroundings, reflect on your situation, and figure out how you can adapt to better adjust to this situation, to improve your living condition, to improve your working condition. And that's when you move to adapting.
You know, it's interesting. There's something I've noticed, and I don't know if this gets talked about a lot, but I've noticed it in people who are in survival mode. Here's what happens, and I'm curious if this sounds familiar to you listening, okay? So you start noticing you're in survival mode and you start feeling the tension of it. You're like, okay, this is really bad. I'm just making it through. I'm realizing I'm surviving. And you get back to that point where it's going to kind of almost break, so you move forward. But then instead of moving forward, you start going, but I should be grateful to have a job. You know, it's not that there are a lot of people who wish they were in the position I was in. I got to be more grateful for what I have. So that tension that moves you from survival to adaptation, I tend to see people they put some slack on the
Yeah.
tension. You know, they start going, well, you know, God forbid, like you're in a situation, but like, yes, he beats me, but he really loves me on the inside, right? So the tension that we're talking about that gets us into reflection to go into the adaptation phase, we consistently have this pendulum swinging of, I'm in survival mode, I don't like it, but you know, it's not really as bad. I mean, look where I am now, bad compared to where I was. How do we make sure we really get to grips that we're in survival mode so that it almost snaps us or pushes us or swings us into that adaptation phase?
Yeah. Well, I think what you are describing is us being stuck um, in our comfort zone, right? I think a lot of us are stuck in that comfort zone, and it's really bad to say that being in survival mode is a comfort, right? But for a lot of people, it is comforting because they're used to that situation,
Mm.
right? They wake up and they know what to expect, good or bad. They know what to expect, and that works for them because of that. And it's difficult to change, right? We know that change is the most difficult thing that we encounter in life, right? That it's very difficult for us to step outside of our comfort zone. So, in order for us to recognize that we are in survival mode and want to change and better adapt in our situation, we have to be able to step outside our comfort zone, right? And you may say that's easier said than done, but sometimes it takes baby steps,
Mm.
right? We have to break out of that habit because that is a form of a habit, right?
Right, right. And it's true. And I know in your book, which is a really, really great read, I love how you do interweave the depth of your story and the depth of that narrative, but then you give examples in more depth and examples of how people can actually do this. And those steps, like just as the one you're giving us today, the idea of, hey, that baby step, that little thing. And I am a huge advocate of this idea of just stressing if you notice yourself starting to feel tension, 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 if you let the tension go by going, oh, it's not that bad, you're robbing yourself of moving into the A phase, which is the adaptation. So you can stay in survival. I mean, arguably, you can stay in survival mode forever, right?
Yes,
Like you
yes.
can never get out of it. But once you kind of get that spark and now you're starting to move into, okay, the way I've been doing it isn't how I have to keep doing it. I'm in adaptation phase. What do you see as the main principles, the main ideas to make sure the adaptation phase is a successful one?
It's planning, right? So adaption is not being stuck. I think sometimes when we think of adapting, we think of a person that has adapted to this situation and they're good now, right? Um, but we don't want you just to adapt, right? Because successful adaptation means you are evolving, right? So we talk about the evolution. So go back to science, right?
Mhm.
So when someone adapts to their surrounding, in order for them to be a better person, in order for them to reach their full potential, they have to evolve, right? So that requires planning. That now you have to go beyond just surviving and then adapting that surviving situation, but you have to look at your situation as a whole and say, okay, what tools and techniques do I have? What network do I have in order for me to evolve beyond this adaptation, right? Because you're probably not happy where you at. If you saw your situation as surviving and you realize I need to better adapt into that situation, you're probably still not happy. Even after you adapted, even after things start working more efficiently for you, right? But it's not as effective, right? You're not fully happy. You're not, your work is better now, but you're probably not satisfied,
Mm.
right?
Right.
Your situation may be less bleak, but it's still bleak, right?
What's going on, y'all? Taking a quick break to talk about our friends over at FreshBooks. Listen, if you're a freelancer, you're an entrepreneur, 1 in 3 people in America are nowadays. You know what it's like to have a mountain of paperwork. You're rushing to get things done. It's all over the place. The growth of the internet has made it even more possible to be an entrepreneur, to be self-employed, but it absolutely can be crazy, right? So there's an all new version of FreshBooks. It's awesome. If you go to freshbooks.com/Arel and enter the art of likability in the how did you hear about us section, you'll get 30 free days of their awesome software. Let me tell you about some of the cool things that it can do. You got easy invoicing, right? You can make it in like a snap in like 30 seconds. You can customize it, get insights from your clients, get online payments. It's rockstar. You can also get this really cool dashboard. You get notifications. You figure out how your business is doing. You get support from, any questions that you have. They're really, really great with their support. You can do mobile expenses. You can take pictures of your receipts with your phone. It's really awesome. If someone hasn't paid you, they send you automated late payment reminders. It's an amazing software. So if you're a freelancer and you want to free up your time, if you're self-employed, go to freshbooks.com/Arel and put in the how did you hear about us section, the art of likability, and you'll get 30 free days. Awesomeness. All right, let's get back to the episode, family. So now when you're, it's interesting, and I get this more and more the more I grow my business, the more I learn about parenting and being married and being the best in those situations I can, which I'm not, but I'm growing towards it. I get more and more solidified in my belief that, and I think it's Einstein who said, it's a very famous quote, that the same mind that created the problem cannot be the same mind that solves it, right? So we have to almost say, okay, if I'm ready to adapt, where you are, you're not going to be able to create that adaptation. So when you're planning, if you're planning with the same information that you've already had, it's not really working. You have to almost pull new information. You have to have a mentor that you can reach to that's kind of been to the mountain peak. What are some of the forms of when you're going into your planning phase in this evolution adaptation? What are the forms of content, the forms of resources that you recommend people reach out to better create a plan that's not going to just have them doing the same thing they were
Yeah.
doing 15 years ago?
Yeah. So let's move to love now, right?
Mhm.
So we if you are in adapting mode, which means that your mindset has changed, right? It means that you seriously want to change your situation, right? So
Mhm.
you're working towards that. You have accepted your situation, right? But you recognize that it needs to change, right? Now, in adapting mode, in order to be successful, adapting to your situation, but also planning for a better future. This is where we need to move into the love model, right? Um, Now it's really easy. Love is probably the most easy thing, but also the most difficult thing,
Mm.
right? Um, People love you. You just don't realize it, right? There are people out there that truly want to see you successful, but you have to embrace them and you have to let them into that life, right? So, in order for us to truly adapt into the situation that we are in, and to identify ways to get out of that or improve on that, we have to look at our surroundings. I truly believe that no man is an island. I truly believe that no one has reached the mountain of success by themselves. It's always someone pushing them. It's always someone cheering them on. It's always a mentor, a mother, a father, a friend who often pushes us to that level. So when we are in adapting mode, we have to look at our surroundings and further develop those relationships and really work on those relationships to include those people. It goes beyond just just knowing who loves you and who you love, but figuring out how can you share that lived experience with those people, right?
And you said something that is so powerful. And I want to make sure that we catch it because you said you have to let people in, right? So many of us are kind of navigating our life and we have this isolation feeling. Nobody loves me. We go on like Instagram or Facebook and we look at everyone else seems to have all these amazing relationships and we don't. Which one of the things we don't realize is that that's everyone's highlight reel for the day, right? That's
Exactly.
not their behind the scenes footage. They're going through life the same. But we compare ourselves to others but we're not letting people in. And what happens is we train people on how to treat us. So if I come up to you and I go, "Hey, Ahmad, let's hang out," and you go, "No, I can't." "Hey, man, let's go hang out." "No, I can't." Like after like the fifth time, I'm gonna be like, Ahmad just doesn't want to hang out with me, so I'm gonna stop asking him. But then you might think, and this isn't a real situation, I'm just giving an example. Then you might think, how come Morel doesn't want to be my friend anymore? He used to invite me out, now he doesn't invite me out. But we have to let people in. When you're letting people in, it's very vulnerable. It's very scary. It's very uncomfortable. So when we're talking about love, and I think a huge part of love is letting people in, the biggest fear we have is, well, if I let them in, they'll judge me. If I let them in, they'll use this against me. If I let them in, they'll know that this little Mr. or Miss Perfect persona that I've created for the world isn't really what I'm living. What do you say to people who come to you and they have that resistance of letting people in so that love can actually take a phase in their life?
I so this goes back to stepping outside your comfort zone, right? You have to get to know people and understand people, but also give them an opportunity to understand you and know you, right? So when we talk about networking, a lot of people are not effective networkers, right? And I see that in a lot of young people or people that are inexperienced, that they see networking as an opportunity. And it's not an opportunity. You're not an opportunist, right? No one wants an opportunist, a person that takes advantage of a relationship. But it's an opportunity to create a relationship, to grow a relationship. So when we talk about love, it's not, you're not trying to form a relationship with everybody, right? You're trying to develop meaningful relationship with certain people that will improve your life, that will improve how you see the world and the world around you, right? So, and I know it's difficult because you are putting yourself out there and you feel vulnerable. Um, but I promise you that once you get past that feeling, you continue to be inspired by those relationships and truly change your situation, because slowly you start getting rid of those people that's not supporting you, because they see, because once you start, becoming more happy, those people that bring that negative vibe, they don't like that, right?
Right,
All of a
right.
sudden, they kind of disappear, or and you start gravitating towards those people that are filling that empty void that you have in your life, right? So, so a perfect example is, you know, because I grew up in a certain neighborhood, and I grew up with certain people, it was very difficult for me to step outside that comfort zone, right? And because I did not step outside of that comfort zone, how I see the world, or how I saw the world, was very narrow, right? And my network was very limited. So I realized many years ago that, looking back at as a high school student, right, I had friends that graduated high school and they had a network of people, right? They can get recommendation letters to college, from doctors, from lawyers, from neighbors, from educators. And that's a network that I didn't have, right? So as I mature, I realize, in order for me to grow professionally, I need to grow my network. I need to grow that love. I need to be able to have people that I respect, that I can connect with, that I can rely on, but also know that I can do the same for them, right? Um, and as I continue those relationships, or build those relationships, my life improved, right? My perspectives improved. I became more mature. My self-esteem grew, but also opportunities grew, because when those people saw opportunity, they thought of you, right? And that's when you start moving beyond adapting,
Right.
because people that love you want to see you grow. They want to see you improve.
Right. So again, just to recap, we're talking about Dr. Ahmad Rahim's book, Resilience, From the Killing Fields to the Boardroom, The S.A.L.T Effect, S-A.L.T. So if you're curious what book we're referring to, if you missed it, that's the book we're talking about. And, when you were speaking just now, it's weird how the mind works. I had this realization about the definition of comfort zone, where the comfort zone is in the realm of what we know. Like, I know this will happen. I know I'll do this. But when you let someone in, you don't know what's going to happen. So that's why it's outside of the comfort zone. Because I know, if I put on this front, if I don't let people in, if I don't let them love me, I know what's going to happen. You have a pretty good sense. But when you go, hey, let me tell you about this like marital problem I'm having, or let me tell you about this like job that I hate, you're letting someone in and you have no idea how they're going to respond. And that is what makes us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That is what makes us stay small and stay in the comfort zone. But then what you said was, that void has to be filled, right? Like, if you create this opening, now by definition, that void has to be filled. And if you're around the people who do love you, who do support you, they'll choose to usually fill that void with love, right? Some people won't. Like, it's life. Like, life's not perfect. So when we're thinking about making this a big step in our life, right? And I know, like, for example, you made a big step professionally where you had a really great career. Everything was going great in one city, but you made a decision to move to be closer to family. And for a lot of people, that could be really hard. They may say, like, I just, no way I can do that. We all at some point get faced with this decision that we have to make that literally is going to transform our life. So when we start getting into this transformation phase, which comes from the choices and decisions we make, how does one really get to the point where they can make those choices to leave an area to go somewhere else, to move to a new city, to leave the job, to leave the person, to start working out finally? Like, there's something that has to happen for the transformation to take effect. What do you see as the most important steps to this next letter, which is T for transformation?
Yeah. Well, this piggybacks off of love, because people that love you will push you, right? A person does not truly love you if they want you stuck in a situation because it benefits them, right? So you got those people that are miserable, right? Because they want you to be miserable because their life is miserable, or they're afraid they're going to lose this confidant, right? So you have an opportunity. They know that opportunity is great for you, but they're going to give you all the negative.
Do you think people consciously think that? Do you think people, like the person who wants to keep you small, Are they like, I can't let them succeed because it's going to keep me small? Or is that more like a subconscious script that's playing that they don't even know?
I think some people it's subconscious and some people it's strategic. It's like I can't get rid.
Mm,
It's like your boss that loves you. If they lose you, the company's
right,
going to go under.
right.
So they want you to be successful, but successful for the business, right? So you have to really reach out to those people that are giving you advice, giving you ideas that are going to improve. That's giving you the broader perspective, right? So going back to my story, that was very difficult for me to move to Chicago in the first place. Leave a tenured track position, and anyone that doesn't know tenureship at a university, that's something that everybody seeks as a professor. And leaving that position, knowing that I was pretty secure. If I was a few years from tenureship, I was in the right, I had the right track in regards to I was doing all the right things, creating all the right relationships. My dean loved me. My president knew me. I was getting grants. So I knew I was going to get tenured with no problem. And I left that. I left a tenured position that I knew was pretty much like it was golden, right? And leave to a larger city like Chicago and become a dean of a university, right? Something that I've never done before, something that's totally outside of my comfort zone. A new city, new position, more responsibility, leave my a job that was consistent, right? Easy for me at that point. And give me and now I have this new challenge, right? So I was nervous, right? I was going back and forth. It's not just the salary, but thinking of the situation, how it's going to impact my family. And the person that loved me was my wife and said, you need to try this. It's going to cause some challenges in our relationship, but you don't want to look back and realize that this was an opportunity that you left out on, right? And you would never know your full potential if you don't do this, right? So my wife could have easily said, "Listen, I have a good job in Syracuse. I work," and she was working for Syracuse University. She had a letterpress business, so things were good on her end. It was comfortable on her end, and she was going to have to leave all of this to support my career, right? So she could have easily said, no, this is not going to work for our relationship. What about my business? But she thought of me and she thought of the family as a whole, right? And Willie Dardell, going back to the person I mentioned in the beginning, I reached out to him also because he's like a father figure. And he said the same thing, you are at you are at the peak, of your career potential, right? So continue to climb, right? Continue to climb. Don't get stagnant. Don't become comfortable in your mid-30s and not realize how good you are or how great you can be. If that happens, you're going to be in your 50s and realize, wow, I lost all this time because I was in this cushion job, right? So that's surrounding myself with people that loved me and pushed me, right? People that probably would have benefited more if I stayed local, but wanted to see me reach my potential, right? And then I had to make the decision to move back, right? So as you mentioned, after I was a dean at a university, did some amazing things, lived in a huge city, had a nice condo overlooking Lake Michigan, right? Could walk into a Cubs game when I can afford it anytime. It was a walking distance, and was a dean of a university that had a multi-million-dollar budget. I decided to come back to Syracuse, not to come back to my comfort zone, but I saw an opportunity for me to reinvest in my community, right? I saw an opportunity for a greater challenge, right? I wanted to do something different, right? And I realized those people that I respect, those people that we call change makers, they never stuck. They never stayed stuck in one position for too long. They always try to recreate themselves, right? I forgot the guy's name, but he's a record executive. I think it was like L.A. Reid or something like that. But he was quoted saying, if you're not in the business of making new life, you're in the business of dying. I was like, wow, that's powerful. So basically what he is saying is that you always have to find ways to recreate yourself, right? Because if you're not recreating yourself, you're slowly dying. Right.
And that is very powerful because for any of us listening who are dealing with feeling stagnant, stuck, unhappy, well, that might be you're creating death, right?
Yeah.
Like you need to start recreating yourself and say, well, what is it that I want to do? What do I want to create in my life? What's most important to me right now? And it's true because I know a lot of highly successful people. I know heads of large companies, billionaires, heads of amazing nonprofits. They never stay in the same path for too long. They evolve, they kind of adapt, if you will, into a new concept, a new idea. But even if you take a look at someone like Facebook, right? Like, so you look at Mark Zuckerberg as an example, most of us would know. Even though he's been doing Facebook for the last, I don't know, 12, 13 years, Facebook has constantly evolved and adapted, and they're in new ideas and new functions and new features. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to like completely stop all this great work that you've done. You can use what you've done. It's not like you said, all right, I've been doing this like education entrepreneurship thing. I'm going to stop that and I'm going to become a scuba diver and just throw everything out. Like, you still use the skill set that you had to grow it. That is a scary thing. I
It
mean,
is.
just hands down, making a recreation, that transforming is scary. And for most of us, when we hear this thought of, oh my God, like I am unhappy and no, I don't want to do this anymore. I have to transform. And, obviously this is why you have SALT. You got to go through S.A.L. before you get to the T. But when someone is getting the love that they need and they're ready to transform, a lot of us won't. We can't, that comfort zone is it's a too strong of a magnetic pull. What can we do to really snap ourselves out of this smaller game of life, or this death creation, if you will, so that we can get into the game of creating life? What is it that's really necessary to make sure we're using the first three letters so we can get to that transformation?
I was fortunate to have people in my life that was always transforming, right? They were like, they were like Optimus Prime, like every second, like boom, they transform into another vehicle. And I found that inspiring. So I surrounded myself with people that were just inspiring. It's like, it's very difficult to stay stuck when you're around impressive people because they motivate you. They don't have to say anything. You just look at their life and look at how they live their life and their attitude and behavior, and that can rub off on you, right? So when it came to transformation, the T in the SALT, the last piece is I was around those people that loved me, but they were always transforming how they see the world, who they are. They were constantly traveling. They were always reading new books. They were always sharing new knowledge. And it kind of pushed me to engage in that conversation. It pushed me to get uncomfortable with where I was at, right? And that's the great thing when you surround yourself with those type of people. So I have two close friends, one by the name of Daryl Burrell, another guy by the name of Maurice Dawson, and we constantly push each other. So every other week we get on the phone, and it's almost where I think a lot of people would see it as showing off. Like I got the latest kicks, I got the the new jacket, or I got the latest BMW, right? With us, it's kind of funny. We share our latest achievements to push each other, right? And it's not like rubbing in each other's face, but more like, what you gonna do next? I got this, right? So from a career perspective, Daryl Burrell would show me a publication, right? It's like, guys, I just got this published, right? Took me a few months. Now what's on your plate, right? And I would say, I got this fellowship, and he goes, nah, that's not good enough, It needs to outrank this, right? And Maurice would say, hey, I got this $50,000 grant from NRC. And we're like, how the hell do you do that? And then we start having this conversation, but we push each other to transform into something new, to something unique, right? So we are happy with each other's success. We definitely pat each other on the back to show, to recognize that success, but we're pushing each other for the next step, right? And that's out of pure love,
And that's important because transformation is very powerful in that for you to believe you can transform, well, for you to transform, you have to believe you can transform.
Yes.
And I believe the quickest, fastest, easiest way is to see or be around people who you see as somewhat as equal to where you are in life, getting something more than you have. Because when you hear about Mark Zuckerberg buying an island, for most of us, we go, well, of course he can, but it doesn't become something we believe.
Yeah.
I don't go around and start saying, well, let me start creating my island fund and open up my bank account because I think that's so outside of the realm of possibility. But when I meet a friend of mine who's like, hey, I just got a best-selling book, I go, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And that's what happens on your calls, I think. If you go, if Maurice could do that, there's no way he's not that much better than me. So it actually turns into a friendly rivalry. It's like very positive because these people look and sound and feel like where you are in life. But then when they achieve it, you then go, well, listen, if he can do it. I remember the first time, and I remember I spoke to you because you had a much nicer car before I had a nicer car. And I remember I was in your car and I was talking about, man, I really like this luxury car and everything. And I was still driving like my 96 Camry at the time. And it was powerful because I'm like, all right, if Ahmad can do this, I can do it. I can do this too, right? And then I went and I got my luxury vehicle because that realm of possibility became real. So whenever you're looking at transformation, it's important that you're also finding people that you look at and say, not only is it great that they did it, but their success means that I can have success. And for some people, they may be saying, all right, well, Dr. Rahim, you're lucky. You had this person and that person. How do I create that kind of luck in my life? How do I start finding the people that are on this level, if you will, where they're in my same neighborhood, but then they're succeeding, which is causing me to succeed, and then they care about me? I think a lot of people might easily dismiss what you're doing as luck or dismiss what you're doing as, well, you just had the stars align for you and they don't align for me, and my life is so much worse than yours. What do we have to really understand about how all of this works so we can meet the people and then get in touch with the folks that will change our life the most and transform our life?
No, I think that's that is an honest perspective. I think you may look at your surroundings and say, I don't have those people, right? I didn't have those people either, right? There was no one that resembled any of those people that I mentioned in my neighborhood. I had to go outside of my neighborhood to develop those relationships. And I'm not saying you need to go to your local grocery store and say, hey, this is my name and this is my background. And, no, it's, I joined organizations that were fighting for a cause that I could support, right? Things that I was passionate around, whether it's community organizing, whether it's related to a social responsibility initiative, or some type of political campaign. But by volunteering, by participating, I developed new relationships. I also developed new experience. I developed new skills. My vernacular changed, right? Because I started learning new language. I stopped using, what I mean, in every, sentence, right?
Yeah. Know what I mean?
Know what I mean? Know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's very important. In order to develop those relationships that go beyond your small circle, you have to work at it, right? We're not talking about speed dating here, right? This is not your one night stand here, right? This is a long-term relationship. So it requires that you work harder at that. And it requires that you get to know that person, but also give that person an opportunity to know you, not at just your best, but give them the full picture, right?
And that, man, I'm telling you, what you just said is worth like $1 million, like literally in your life. Because what happens for most people is they say, well, you're lucky, Dr. Rahim, you had all these people in your life. Look at me, I don't have anyone. But then you ask that same person, well, where have you volunteered? What organizations have you actively chosen to get? Every single community has volunteer opportunities. They have associations. They have Kiwanis clubs. They have Chamber of Commerces. They've got Lions Club. The list goes on. But then you look at these people who are achieving and complaining, but they're not doing anything to be around those people. And what, like even today, right? Like I met you today, and you introduced me to another gentleman who's very successful in our area, and I've never met him before. So now, just by knowing you and putting together, you reaching out to me reaching out to you, we getting this podcast together, I now meet that person, and then that opens up this kind of domino effect. But if we stay in our room, like no one's gonna run to your room, knock on your door, and say, "Do you have big goals? Because I'm looking for someone who has big goals, and I thought I figured I'd knock on your door." And you go, "Why? Yes, I do." But when we put ourselves out there, when we go and we actively immerse ourselves in um, the community involvement or work that is relevant to our goals, we'll start meeting the people, and then we start changing our words, we start changing our actions, and that's what makes the huge difference in life.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I when I speak with young people or people my age that have not changed, and I ask them that same question, like, what are you doing outside of your 9 to 5, right? They tell me they don't have time to do anything else. Well, if you don't have time to do anything else, then you don't have time to change. You sure have a lot of time to complain, right? So you have to reflect on your situation, right? I remember I would go to these different type of organization, these meetups that people do around the city, and as a person of color, I would hear people say, "Well, they don't have any people of color there," and I would say, "Why don't you go? I'm there." Right? And they go, no, it's volunteering. I need to get paid. It's like, I'm not getting paid. Well, you got a good job. I didn't always have a good job, right? No, I'm too busy. I got 3 jobs and I'm still going. And I have a family. So we can't continue to make excuse, right? So we make excuses. And then we're in our 50s and we're still making the same excuses, right? You have to be able to say, listen, enough is enough, right? I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's outside of my daily routine. It's outside of my community. That meeting, those people don't look like me. But if you continue to go to those places, those events with people that look and sound like you, then you're never going to change. You're not even adapting. You're just surviving. You're stuck, right? So in order for you to improve your life, you have to improve your associations.
Right. And that's so funny because when people say things like, "Oh, I hear this all the time. I'm really busy. You don't get it. I'm maxed out." But you take anyone who has a job, and I was like, "All right, well, let's say your boss, let's say the person normally works 8 to 6, and then they go, 'Well, I got an hour commute, and then when I come home, I got to eat, then I'm tired, I go to sleep.'" I said, "Well, if your boss said the only way you can keep your job is if you work from 8 to 8 now, people would find a way to rearrange their schedule to make it work. If they said, "Oh, you got to come in weekends now," people would. So we would adapt, if you will, if someone forces us to, but we don't always adapt and transform for ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is the key, is to say what's more important, what you being the captain of your own ship or someone else being the captain of your own ship. And you are doing it by being involved and also too, I love when and this is like my little secret sauce here too. I love going to situations where I am the only person of color in a lot of situations because then I stand out, right?
Yeah.
Then they're like, "Oh, look, Arel's here," and it's like, so if I go to and it's nothing but Asian people, I'm like, I can't wait to go to that event because no one looks like me there,
Yep.
And the more you can do that, the more. And then what I also find, and tell me if you found this, when you're going into environments where people may not be the same age as you, like everyone's older, or everyone doesn't look like you because of ethnic reasons, whatever, they like want you in there because they want that. They want, so now they're invested in you succeeding. How has putting yourself in a position that most people don't, why has that been so important and how has that been important for you?
And, it has really, reflecting on that. So imagine being in an ocean, right? Just filled with different fishes, right? Just so, and you would you look like any fish, right? You kind of go through the same routine. And I think if you continue to be in those environments, you just a fish in an ocean, right? I'd rather be a shark in a pond, right? Stick out. When I was in Chicago, there was a lot of great opportunities, but I was a fish in an ocean, right? There were a lot big wigs out there, right? It took years for me to develop those relationships, and it's going to take me more years to further those relationships. Being back in Syracuse, I consider myself a shark, in a pond, because there's no one that looks like me, that talks like me, that have my background, right? So going to those events, you have to see yourself in that position, right? Don't see it as you sticking out and not having anything in common, but see that as an opportunity for you to showcase who you are, right? Showcase your skills, your experience, and develop relationships that's going to further the opportunities around you, further your network, further your ability in regards to e- experiences and skill set and things like that. But develop new friendship, long term friendship.
And life becomes way more fun that way. I mean,
Exactly.
you start it's way more fun that way. Dr. Raheem, we have even touched the tip of the iceberg of the potential. I mean, we could go on for another hour talking about this. And your book Resilience: From the Killing Field to the Boardroom, and how we can use the SALT effect: surviving, adapting, loving, transforming. It's an incredible read, and I really encourage people to get it. If people want to get your book, where would you recommend is the best place for folks to go?
So they can go to Amazon, look me up, Emad, E-M-A-D, Rahim, R-A-H-I-M. There's a few books out there, but definitely pick up Resilience. They can go to Barnes & Noble's online, find it also on there.
And we'll have links in the show notes, so if
Okay.
you guys want to click on the links, you can get it. And what's the best place for people if they want to stay in touch with you? If they're like, dude, you're awesome, I want to get in your life. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
By way of LinkedIn or by Twitter. So my handle is Dr. D-R, E-M-A-D, Rahim, R-A-H-I-M. Instagram, same handle. And you can look me on LinkedIn. I'm the only guy that smiles with the name Emad Rahim, and I have no hair, so I stick out like a sore thumb. Connect with me. I also have a fan page. If you look up in Facebook, Emad Rahim, The Forgotten Genocide, you will see a fan page with the book and things like that. Yeah.
Great. And if you had to leave us with one idea before we kind of sign out today, what is the one thing you want to make sure we all get before we go today?
Look for an opportunity to get uncomfortable each day, right? So when we talk about being uncomfortable, reflects back to the SALT, right? Develop new relationships, a new place, new people, new opportunities. Get uncomfortable.
Great. And if you guys want to know more about the book, please click. We're going to put some show notes up for this so you can click on it. If you want to get Dr. Raheem to speak at your event, he would absolutely crush the stage. So if you have an organization that deals with any of these topics that would be of importance, I couldn't recommend it more highly as a rock star option. And I'll share this with you. We talked about a lot. We talked about how staying in your comfort zone is creating death and not creating new life, and how surviving and adapting and love and transforming, how you can do all of this. But here is my promise to you. This is my promise to you, okay? The information that Dr. Raheem shared with us today will do nothing for your life. Absolutely nothing. When you implement this information, that's when you're going to see the transformation. So don't listen to this podcast and be like, yo, Dr. Raheem dropped some knowledge. That was real cool. I really appreciate him coming on. And then you go back to do absolutely nothing. Take some time to reflect. What is it that stood out to you the most? Maybe you need to go join an organization that you're not involved with right now. Maybe you need to go find a group of people that have nothing on the surface in common with you, except maybe they're high achieving people. Maybe you need to just reach out to a friend and love them, or whatever it is, please choose something, because if you just listen to this and choose nothing, nothing is going to change. Information doesn't change your life. The implementation of information absolutely transforms your life. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Dr. Raheem, for hanging out with us. We out of here, y'all. You are awesome. High five. Psh.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast, The Art of Likeability, and reach out with any questions you have. Until next time, remember, my friend, you are awesome.